right, guys, we're going to head into our final panel of the day. And thank you guys so much for being here, for sticking around, and really, really hyped to talk to all these experts in the space. So why don't we start us off and let us know who you are and what you do.
Hi, I am Morgan Romine, and I am the Director of Initiatives for AnyKey, which is an advocacy group for diversity in gaming, diversity and inclusion. We like to support all of the marginalized players in games and try to help get them more visibility and more opportunities to play. And we also do research and have published some white papers about diversity in gaming, the obstacles people face, and some of the ideas for how to address that. So AnyKey.org is where we have all that stuff living.
Great, thank you. All right, Christine.
Thank you. I'm Christine Tomlinson. I'm a lecturer and researcher at UCI. I do work on gender in video games, how to be more inclusive, experiences that people have, some of the hostilities that both male and female players have experienced during their times of playing competitive games, and some of the ways that we can circumvent that and how players deal with it on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Noah?
I'm Noah Whinston. I'm the CEO and founder of Immortals and Los Angeles Valiant, i.e. the reason a lot of people are here.
Hi, I'm Alice White. I head up global talent acquisition for Blizzard Entertainment, which means I'm the lucky person that gets to hire everyone through my team at Blizzard.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Fawcette. By day, I'm a senior brand manager at Xbox on the Gears of War franchise. And by night and on my other spare time, I co-lead the Women in Gaming team at Xbox, which is our internal kind of diversity initiative for increasing women in the gaming sphere. But we also work externally with the industry like Blizzard, Activision, EA, Ubisoft to promote women's inclusion in our industry.
Fantastic. Yay. All right, so what initially caused you to get into the gaming space? And was it because you were a gamer when, or just you saw opportunity? You know, tell us about that.
I've been playing since I was a kid, and didn't think it was unusual at all to be a girl playing video games. And I played way too much in college. I played a lot of EverQuest. I was a hardcore MMO player, and I played. I was a guild leader. That's how hardcore. Like, you really have to sacrifice your soul to be a guild leader. And so when I graduated, I knew I wanted to go to graduate school eventually, but I decided to be a community manager because I figured I'd already been doing it for free, so I might as well be getting paid for it. So I got hired by Ubisoft to be a community manager, where then, while being a community manager, we founded the Frag Dolls, which was an all-women's professional gaming team. Because Ubisoft had great games that we were, like me and a bunch of these other women were playing and really kicking a lot of butt. And we got a lot of support from the company, like, well, why don't we make a team out of you guys, and you can go to tournaments and represent our company and the games that you're playing, and it'll be an awesome partnership. And it was a 10-year awesome excursion into esports as an all-female team. And obviously, I have been sort of invested ever since then in supporting women in esports. And now at AnyKey, I'm happy to continue to carry that torch.
Great. All right, Christine, what initially caused you to get into gaming?
What caused me to get into gaming, I guess my parents, like a lot of people in here, bought me a console, and that's what kicked it all off. I was able to have my Super Nintendo system and play all of those games as a bonding experience with my family, and for many, many, many hours, probably an unhealthy amount of hours after school during elementary school. And it just sort of stuck with me, and then I ended up being fortunate enough to be able to teach and research about video games, so sort of making my hobby my job.
Amazing. All right. Noah?
So from my end, I never got the parents buying me a console experience. I started on PC with Pajama Sam. Yeah, okay. But honestly, I would never have really described myself as a core gamer, right? I moved on pretty quickly from single-player games, and to me, getting involved in esports was always more about the competitive element, right? I loved traditional sports, and esports was a kind of new place to exercise that competitive element. And so for me, the games that I enjoy the most are kind of PvP games, playing against other players in World of Warcraft or Overwatch or League of Legends or Counter-Strike. And then while I was at college, I kind of saw an opportunity to to take a bit of a leap and start an esports team. So I dropped out of school and moved to Los Angeles and started an esports team. And here we are 3 years later. That kind of just happened.
No big deal. Very big deal.
That's great. Well, I'd like to say I started playing as a young child, but I did not. I actually have a different route into this space, which began as watching. So I'm not just a talent acquisition leader at Blizzard, I'm also a mom. So my route into video games was wanting to really understand where my child at the time was spending so much time. And lucky for me, it was cool when I got in there, and I found it to be fascinating. I mean, I'm kind of early adopter of Minecraft myself because I was in there figuring it out with someone right alongside. And so then later, when I was pretty happy strolling along doing talent acquisition in the pharmaceutical industry, when Blizzard called and asked if I would think about bringing some of the approach and my learnings from pharmaceuticals or life sciences into this new space, I had already knew enough about it to say, yeah, let's talk more about that. So a little different path in, but just excited to be here today and hear the stories of some of the others that have a lot longer track records in actually playing the games than me.
Very cool.
Okay. So Final Fantasy was my gateway drug into gaming, definitely when I was younger. But I had a more traditional marketing career, so I spent about 12 years in the marketing industry doing research. I actually worked at a boutique youth marketing company in Toronto for most of my time in the early kind of post-dot-com boom. Most of you guys were not around to remember that. But essentially I worked with cool clients, and I worked in Nintendo and I worked with Xbox, and I took every chance I could to be on those projects and kind of demonstrate my gaming knowledge. From there I went to community events. I tried to do pretty much anything that was going on around the Toronto game scene. I tried to write video game reviews for free in my spare time, even though I was kind of holding down a marketing gig. So for me it was about proving that I had actual job-worthy experience on the marketing side. I had marketing chops and insights and all that sort of good stuff that comes with doing the job, but then proving to the community that I was, an actual gamer, which is kind of sad that, as women, sometimes you have to prove that you're an actual gamer, but, showing up, being seen, making connections, and then when, kind of the right role opened at Xbox, it was nicely kind of a slam dunk for me. So, yeah.
Great. All right, so our event is obviously focused on building a community, and what do you see as the most necessary component of building a healthy and inclusive, not just a community, but an industry? Morgan, I'd like to hear from you first, especially with the AnyKey organization and your driving force on.
We want the key thing?
Yes, the key thing, zing.
Oh, well, the key thing to building a healthy industry. Well, I think that awareness is a really important thing, but I think we're getting there. Actually, as an industry, the awareness is there and is increasing. So I think that is good. The next step, I really think the industry needs to work in coordination with the communities a little bit more directly to solve this problem, because I think that there's been a lot of sort of passing the responsibility, or kind of looking at each other as like who's responsible for making these spaces better and more inclusive and more welcoming, and it hasn't really been clear up until now. Like if you're taking esports as the example, which we are because we're here today, we have tournament organizers, we have game publishers, we have the teams themselves, we have the communities, and they're all sharing these spaces. They're all stakeholders in these spaces, and who's responsible for making these spaces good? Like who's going to take charge of that? And it takes time and it takes resources, and so it's a lot easier just to be like, oh no, I thought they were going to do it. So we're focusing on making our team really good, or we're focusing on the production, or focusing on making sure that the game is awesome and runs smoothly during this competition, and somebody needs to actually say, wait, we need to take control of our space and set our values and know what that means and how do we do that. But I mean, I think the good news is I think we're getting there because people are starting to wake up to the fact that it needs to happen. So that I think we're getting there slowly but surely.
Yeah, definitely. Nicole, do you want to answer the same one? I mean, what do you see as the most necessary component of building a healthy and inclusive community?
I think I'll talk about it from the industry perspective. I think for us, it's about the understanding that we need diverse teams. And a lot of that is awareness, is kind of looking around the table and making sure we all don't look the same, essentially. There is a lot of value that comes from people's experiences, where they grow up, what they're exposed to, what's important to them, their values, their beliefs. And I think the industry, for a long time, has suffered from a lot of the same people around the table. And so on the Xbox side, that's something we're super focused on, is ensuring that we're giving power to different people, fresh voices, new perspectives, whether you're a player, you're a streamer, you're a content creator, you're a dev, you're in marketing, every voice is valued. I think there was somebody that kind of said that today, that at Blizzard, that's one of their key values, that every voice matters, and I love that. And I think that that is going to be the driving force of change in the industry, is giving value and worth to those voices that have long been silenced or been ignored.
Christine, for you, what's been your experience there? I mean, has that been part of your studies and kind of seeing how the industry's evolved?
Yeah, so in terms of the industry as a whole and in terms of player experiences, I agree with both of those sentiments. Awareness is important, visibility is hugely important, which can be really difficult because of a lot of the experiences that female players tend to have, where they're, quizzed on things that male players wouldn't be quizzed on, or questioned in terms of actually belonging in the community or not. But it's unfortunate because it's kind of on us to push through that and be more visible and have a louder voice and sort of say we're here, because that's the only way that the culture can change. And there are things happening on the industry side that I think are great. Having more voices of diversity behind the scenes is excellent. That lets us tell different stories, that lets us tell stories that aren't stereotyped, which is amazing in a lot of ways. But additionally, things like what Blizzard has done, sort of translating salty messages into funny messages in Overwatch, I think things like that are actually way more important than we think they are, because that's going to help shift the culture. It points out how ridiculous those reactions are and sort of helps the community move in a direction where it's not tolerated anymore.
Noah, do you feel any pressure as CEO of a huge esports organization to recruit not just diverse staff, but diverse players?
So first, I just want to preface this answer with the fact that I'm very cognizant that I'm the only guy to be on a panel today. So what I would say, right, is I'm here generally more from the perspective of people in the audience of learning, right? And part of speaking truth to power isn't just talking to Twitch or Blizzard or Twitter about how to do better, but also talking to LA Valiant as an organization and me as an individual about how we can do better. So I think I'm really going to try to not make sweeping generalizations about the industry, given my lack of personal experience with a lot of the problems that we're talking about today. I'd say, from my perspective and from LA Valiant and Immortals' perspective, we approach trying to build a more inclusive community in a few ways. So first, there are obviously channels that we control, right? We don't control the game of Overwatch, we don't control the platform of Twitch, but we control our Twitter account, right? Or our Discord community. And we can make sure that our moderation policies there are aimed towards creating a community that is not just inclusive of people already inside of it, but welcoming to new members. And I know we have a few people in the crowd that are members of that Discord community, right? I think they might have expressed their fandom of Valiant first through that type of Discord community. And they really, if they had been met with an unwelcoming or a hostile environment in that initial contact with other groups of fans, it would have been really hard for them to continue to support our organization. So that's really important. To more directly answer your question, I think we're always looking for opportunities to not just elevate voices of marginalized groups through events like this, but to elevate voices from those groups on a day-to-day basis through involvement in our organization, right? Because as great as events like this are for a one-time pop, it really needs to translate into more sustained visibility and representation and empowerment for it to have an impact over the course of the long term.
And Alice, how do you handle diversity recruitment, at Blizzard? I mean, I know that's a core pillar too.
Yeah, it's very important to us. It's part of the reason that I was attracted to join Blizzard, is because we were really set up to make a difference and make progress. So it's something we focus on every day. It's something we try to be thoughtful about on every position that we hire for. I mean, one quick example I can share is that we have a really cool internship program, in case you guys didn't know about that. I see some former interns who are current employees in the audience, and also some interns I can't wait to see on campus in a couple of weeks. And last year alone, we increased the number of women in that program by 166%. And this year, we've increased it further. So we have the biggest class of interns coming in. There are 90 of them who will be on campus with us this summer. And I think looking at the areas where we have the opportunity to make the impact, that's clear, right? Any of the universities I visit, there are just as many strong women in computer science classes as there are men. So that's our chance to really have an impact. And we also look at any open role for leaders within our organization and make a very purposeful effort to be inclusive in our strategy, not just to settle for people who apply, but we have a team that's actively outsourcing candidates and targeting people who represent diversity of all types, because frankly, that's what makes our games better, is having people that think differently, working on them and creating new characters and heroes and environments. So that's one example.
Yeah. So speaking to those diverse candidates and then creating diverse games, Christine, maybe you want to take this. What can professional gaming organizations do to improve the female experience within gameplay?
So in terms of improving the female experience within gameplay, I think that things are moving in the right direction in a lot of ways. Even just events like this, getting people together to increase people's understanding that, yeah, these are all of the people that are here, these are all of the people that are interested. That helps, I think, not only the industry, but the players as well, because everyone can kind of bond and get to know each other and see, yeah, there are other people like me, or there are other people different from me, and that's helping us build a stronger community. I don't think it's like it was, a decade ago or a couple of decades ago, where it wasn't as obvious and people sort of might have felt like they couldn't express their interest. But the more the industry can highlight these kinds of events, highlight diversity among the fans, and probably include some more diverse players on teams, one of the most important things that anyone can have is someone to look up to, someone that represents them sort of in their face. This is an option that I have. This is someone that I could be. This is someone like me in this position, and I'm going to strive for this. So I think that that's probably the next step, is getting more diversity on teams and having more of these kind of community building events.
Mm-hmm. Nicole, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that even from the internal perspective, it matters through the entire system, right? So you need to ensure that there are women on the development team that are helping vet, the design of the games, the contents, the characters, the clothing. Women are involved in the playtesting and QA testing. Women are involved in the marketing, the PR, all through the line. Again, it kind of goes back to the diverse teams, what Christina's saying. Without that, you create a lot of blind spots, which I think is what the industry has kind of had for a long time, and why maybe people haven't felt comfortable being in it. But as we progress and we start to have more of a watchful eye, or at least due care and attention to the content that we're creating, you have more. And again, the dialogue is opening. That's why I kind of love events like this. And as much as we haven't touched on the stuff that's going out in the external world, and as much as that is kind of horrible, it also sheds a light on what is good, what the good coming out of it is, which is a more purposeful perspective, and the need to be really deliberate. And so more people feel comfortable kind of raising their hand and being like, yeah, that costume, that does not look appropriate, right? And where maybe people were not comfortable doing that before. And it kind of becomes like a kind of shared responsibility, a shared value amongst the team, and then kind of trickles throughout hopefully the company and the industry.
So let's talk about toxicity in gaming for a little bit, and maybe some steps to combat it. I mean, it's obviously changed in the last few years. I feel like it's gotten a little bit better, albeit slowly. So what will prove that toxicity is going away and that changes are being made in the community? Morgan?
Well, what will prove it? Probably if we see more people of diverse backgrounds participating. And you know, the dream certainly in esports is to see women on the main event stages on those teams competing at the highest level. I'm sure probably everybody who's here at this event probably agrees that women are capable of doing that. So it's not a lack of will or capacity. It's a matter of taking away the barriers that are in between where we are now and getting to that dream. So I think that once we can see that, then we'll know that we've done a good job. Getting there is less clear. Like how can we do that, and how can we address the toxicity stuff specifically? I mean, I think again, at least from the industry side, the industry taking responsibility to educate their players on what types of behaviors and what values are positive and are contributing positively to the community. I think that there's been, in the past, there's been some sort of reluctance on the part of publishers and game makers to necessarily enforce anything or like restrict their players too much, and there's freedom of speech and we want to impinge on their freedom of speech. But I think that the tide is turning on that, and it's more that actually we can cultivate a culture in our spaces that is positive. It's not about, you know, restricting their speech or banning everybody. It's, you know, not about using the ban hammer all the time liberally for any minor infraction. It's about educating, because a lot of people don't really realize when they're being jerks, honestly. Like, it is amazing some of the studies that have been done, and Riot actually has done a pretty good job of studying their own player behaviors and seeing that when a player says something terrible, that when they get a notice saying like, "Are you sure you want to say that?" and then they're like, "Oh, actually, maybe I wasn't really thinking about it." And so then they won't do it again. They'll stop. You'll see a much, like a huge drop off if they get some sort of notice that actually that was not desirable behavior. The really determined toxic troll is actually a smaller proportion of what we're seeing in toxicity. So, again, companies taking some responsibility and just thinking of ways like how can we cultivate a more positive community environment, I think would be huge. Not to mention, like we've seen games have developed over the years, have developed some awesome social features. Like it's not just a matter of proximity chat anymore. If you're playing online and it's not, we've learned that it's not so great to just be able to hear anybody that's near you. Like that is an open door for bad behavior. But if you link it to friends, for example, so you can talk to your friends when you're nearby, but not to somebody who's not on your friends list, or if they're a couple degrees removed. Like, we have the technology to do this. We've done it before in other games. Sort of the dream for me would be to see companies sharing that information as opposed to keeping it close and secret like it's part of their secret sauce. It's like, no, we all are hurt by the toxicity that exists in these communities. We're not just a silo between each game. These behaviors leak through. So if we could have companies work together to share, like, this has actually worked and this was terrible, that would be a really big start.
Yep. Have everyone go ahead and answer this question. Yeah, Christine, what do you think we can do to combat toxicity and just make the gaming space a little bit healthier?
I think that's actually an excellent answer to start with. So I will build on that. So in terms of the industry stuff, that's a great point. In terms of players, something that I've noticed in terms of the research that I've done and in talking to players and interviewing them is that a lot of male and female players alike will do a lot of things to just sort of shut themselves off from the toxicity, which is, it's an obvious thing to do. It's really understandable that people would want to do that. But the problem is it doesn't do anything to dissuade the behavior. And so if you're closing yourself off, if you're going into Discord chat and not using game chat so you don't have to hear the other players, if you're trying to hide yourself in other ways using specific avatars or using specific screen names, one, it's a problem for visibility in terms of knowing who's in the space, and it maintains the idea that, no women are present or no people of color are present, or, it's just all white men who are playing the games. It's also a problem of not shutting it down. So for players, calling this out when it happens, even if you do it through humor, can be hugely important for the cultural shift. Just letting them know, hey, we're here. We don't like this, that's not okay. So in addition to industry stuff, which is hugely important, players can play a role in this as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Noah, maybe you can talk to the esports side of things as well.
Yeah, so I think there's a few points around this. First off, I'd say, like, whether you view it as fortunately or unfortunately, I think reform here looks incremental rather than exponential, right? So I don't think there's like one thing, when we solve this one problem, suddenly everything becomes magical, right? But at the same time, that means there's no one big hurdle that we have to clear. I think things move one step at a time. And what we've seen in our own communities and in the kind of fan communities that we control is that kind of gradually changing policy and gradually improving the experience for a more diverse set of fans leads to a snowball effect that eventually creates a community that reflects the values that we hold as an organization. And I think, really building off of some of the earlier points made here, that is a fundamental difference that I think, as it gradually gets addressed, will also gradually create a better experience both inside fan communities, inside the games themselves, because everyone talks about the internet being anonymous and how many awful things that leads to, and it does lead to a lot of awful things. But a lot of the terrible things that people say online, as much as they might preach free speech, they're not going around and saying it to people on the street, right? There are real social consequences and community consequences for the type of behavior that's accepted online. So I think gradually, as we begin to create a unified community online, or even just a community within a game, or a community within a fan base, with set social norms and standards of behavior and social consequences when you don't meet those norms, I think the internet gradually becomes more and more like what real life is like, right? Where if you act in an unacceptable way, you're not going to get thrown in jail, but like there's a reason that the people that are terrible on Discord or Overwatch voice chat aren't going around doing that on the street also. So I guess talking about it from the esports perspective, I think a huge piece of that incrementalism is representation matters, which is a pretty uncontroversial statement, right? And I think as you build representation, whether it's a player like Gregory playing in Overwatch League, or whether it's having, the like certain core set of your fan base be a diverse group and exemplify the ideals that you want to hold up as an organization, that then becomes the model for other people to follow. And so I think that's kind of the way we approach it.
Yeah. All right, Alice?
So I was thinking a little bit about the part of your question, which was how will we know when we've gotten there? And it's kind of interesting because I think we'll know when we stop talking about it, right? But in the meantime, we have to talk about it a lot, and we have to report it every time we see it happening. And I think, working at Blizzard, I have a different vantage point. I think every stakeholder group involved in this has a responsibility to create shared values, and maybe it's their version of the values. I mean, at Blizzard, it's play nice, play fair. That's one of our core values. So there isn't a department at Blizzard that isn't aware of the toxicity issues and isn't working on real actionable efforts to move in the other direction. So I think we'll know when we're not sitting on a panel and it's not a topic, but in the meantime, we have to keep talking about it and reporting it when we see it. And even if it's not happening to you, you have to report it when you see it happening to someone else.
Absolutely. Nicole?
Damn, these are all amazing answers. Sucks to go last. Yeah, I mean, I'll just sort of be short about it because I agree. It's kind of all of these things together, and I think at Xbox we talk a lot about allies and an ally culture, and I think that's kind of important for us as well, not just within the Xbox organization, but within the industry, that we all kind of stand up and call each other out on certain things, but then also stand up and support where support is needed. And I think it's going to take all kind of the companies coming together to do that, and communities. But I completely agree. I love the sentiment around ensuring kind of shared values, because then that makes the bad behavior taboo. And I think right now there's just too much. Maybe not tolerance is maybe not the right word, but we're not kind of combating it in the right way. And I know on our side we're trying to be a lot more vocal about what our company's culture is, what matters to us, that we're, that this is not just something we're going to talk the talk. We're definitely going to walk the walk, and you can see it kind of permeating throughout the company, where everybody feels entitled to then take a responsibility in ensuring, our players' safety, our staff safety, that everybody can work and play in a comfortable environment. So,
yeah. So, Morgan, as someone that used to be a professional gamer, how do we help these professional female players kind of deal with the burden of maybe being the only female on a team or the only female in an entire league. It's quite a burden to bear for some of these girls, which has led to their exit from certain leagues because they can't deal with the toxicity.
Well, I can speak to the Frag Dolls example as a really great environment in which we were able to sort of shelter each other from that kind of toxicity and from that attention and being singled out. It was really helpful to have a whole team of girls who all were kind of dealing with the same thing and all under the same spotlight, and we could support each other and tell each other, like, don't listen to that, that's stupid, whatever, like, that is nonsense. Focus on playing, focus on the team, we're having fun, we're good. And we were able to support each other, and that was really, really important. And I think that we see that in the environments where there are other all-women's teams, like in the Counter-Strike scene, they have a pretty well-established women's sort of league circuit, and women's teams that have been playing together for a long time, and they're able to sort of shelter each other that way. So I think that when we're thinking about how can we support these sort of single women, the solo women who are sort of out there on their own, giving them as much support as possible is wonderful. But I think too that those teams who are willing to take that on and are, like the Shanghai Dragons, when they're taking on Gaguri, like, they need to support her, and hopefully they are, and they need to internally be like, you're good, we support you, you're one of our teammates, like, you're here because you deserve to be here. And them really supporting her will be, I think, the key to her to surviving this really harsh spotlight, because the spotlight is not easy for the guys either. I mean, this is an intense environment. So just giving them as much support and trying to drown out the toxicity, I think, as fans, is the best thing that we can possibly do.
Yeah. Noah, can you talk a little bit about maybe the onboarding experience for new players coming into the esports scene and how you help them deal with maybe this newfound fame and pressure?
Yeah. I mean, there's only so much like a sit-down conversation with a player can really accomplish, and I think looking at the transition of all the players on our Overwatch League team, right, who went from a year ago being kids playing at home or kids playing on a relatively low-profile team to still kids playing on a really huge international stage. Like, that's not ever going to be an easy transition, no matter what resources we give them. And with that said, all of the people on our team are still men, right? So like, they're not even dealing with that additional pressure or that additional spotlight. So I'd say from our side, we really try to invest heavily in making sure that there are support resources there for our players. So, we have our director of player performance here, Doug Gardner, who has been really helpful in creating what we view as an environment in which our players aren't just nurtured inside the game, but nurtured outside the game, right? When it comes to nutrition, physical fitness, physical therapy, but also sports psychology for performance, and like, in some ways, like personal psychology, right? It's not sitting down on a couch to talk to a shrink, right? It's more making sure that they feel like they have an emotional outlet or that they can form emotional connections outside of the context of their immediate coworkers and their immediate colleagues. And I think that is going to be a really big change that I think Overwatch League is going to be very important in enabling when players begin to view themselves as kind of permanent residents in a city rather than people that are there temporarily to play a video game. And when the Los Angeles Valiant players start adapting to the fact that they are now Los Angeles residents and start creating social circles and start making friends outside of the context of their professional environment, I think that's going to be really, really important for their kind of adjustment to a more well-rounded lifestyle, unlike the stereotype of what a professional gamer does, which is shockingly close to what a professional gamer actually does. As far as thinking about like representation, or how do you make it easier to accommodate or easier for someone from a marginalized group to join a team, I think from our perspective, that has to do with enforcing the same standards on our players that we do on our fans, right? What we stand for as an organization isn't limited to our fan communities. It's also about what we do as professionals. It's about what the players do as professional athletes. And when it comes to recruiting, that's where it gets kind of tough, right? I think there are certainly sexist barriers all the way up the pyramid, right? From the very beginning, around like the cultural and social stigma that video games are for boys, all the way up to the top, where there are certainly skilled female players in the world that might not have gotten chances on professional teams because of the fact that they're women. And this is one of the ones where like it's really not for me to tell what the fix is, right? Like I'm here to learn, and so I really would love some pointers on, look, like what is the best way to actually solve that problem at the highest levels of professional play, and what's the chicken and the egg, right? Is it important to first have as many female players as possible at the professional level to incentivize participation at the bottom of the pyramid, or does participation at the bottom of the pyramid inherently create a kind of generation of more skilled and more talented female players that can then compete at the highest levels? I don't know what's supposed to come first.
It's that one.
That one?
It's the bottom. The bottom is the top.
Bottom top. Only because, you know, if you try to enforce it from the top, we found that doesn't usually work. Gamers will reject that, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I don't want to turn this into like a two-sided thing when previously it's been a one-sided thing, but my question would be, you know, you mentioned the female CSGO circuit, right? And how that has kind of provided a level of visibility for women that are certainly talented at the game, but might not be as talented as the very best male players in the world. So is that an example of something that is significantly helpful because of the representation side, or is it better to have women playing in the same leagues as men, even if that leads to them not getting as much visibility while we wait for kind of participation to catch up?
Hopefully we can have both of those things, but yeah, you're right. That's a whole nother thing. But we should talk more about it later.
Yeah. Nicole, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say the first panel this morning, I think, answered that question, if anybody remembers, which was that answer both, right? So they definitely said, like, hey, you need that at the community level to imbue younger girls and people coming up with the confidence and skills to play. But absolutely, we should be driving, you know, levels of leadership and professionalism at the top as well. So it isn't a chicken and the egg. It's a chicken and egg, yeah.
Well, let's dig deeper a little bit into that. I mean, does it start at the developer level? Are the teams that are creating the games, is that where the diversity has to start, who are then creating the games that are more diverse, that's bringing in a more diverse audience, and then it kind of just goes from there? I mean, Nicole, do you want to start us off?
It's a nice cycle. I like that cycle. I think so. I'm not a developer, but I work with developer teams. And typically, if there aren't women on the dev team or influencing the dev team, some of that dialogue can get lost. So I think it is important to have women at that stage, whether they're directly, you know, in the, you know, programming or coding or designing of the game, but more important on the kind of dev engineering team is important. Just because, again, without that perspective, you lose an entire understanding of what other people's experiences are. And they look through it at the lens of the way they play. And that's not representative of the audience necessarily. So yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, kind of changing the culture inside out is important. And I think, you know, we've kind of seen that in the industry already this year, just even through like the variety of titles that are coming out, the diversity of titles. That doesn't mean that every title is going to be, you know, diversity quilt, right? Like we're going to have, like, there's still going to be games that are specific to certain genres or whatever, but I think it's still important to kind of understand that there is a broader audience that plays. It's no longer just kind of that typical check the box of male 18 to 34. So yeah. That's a long-winded answer for saying yes.
That's totally fine. So yeah, Alice, you want to talk about, I mean, from a recruitment standpoint too, do you think that diversity within the entirety of the industry starts with the developers that are actually working on these titles?
Well, I don't think it hurts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if you have a diverse set of thinking going into game development and you're getting the real perspective of the different types of people, it matters, right? So I think at Blizzard we take that very seriously, and you know we're actively seeking to add more diversity into all of the roles that impact the actual games that are made.
Absolutely. So in terms of actionable items, because I know this has been kind of an issue for male players and just friends that I play with, you know, what can they do to help this issue and support their fellow female gamers? Morgan?
Well, I think we've touched on some of them. speaking up. I think Christine mentioned the importance of speaking up, even if it's just to make a joking comment when you're online and you're playing with, if you have some friends there, even if it's not, you're playing with people you don't know and you hear somebody harassing somebody else, calling it out is actually really helpful and really appreciated by the people who are there. And that's, I think, we kind of culturally as a group, we need to get over the reluctance, I think, because we're afraid that then we're going to become the target, which does happen, honestly, but that's much easier for the guys who are around, our allies. They're much less likely to become the target of harassment. I mean, it's just the reality. If you have women speaking up for themselves, they're just going to continue to get it. But if you have a guy speak up and say like, hey, that's not cool, or make light of it, whatever, kind of change the tone and redirect, and just showing support for the marginalized people who are there is super helpful.
Yeah. Christine, do you want to answer this as well? And how do we get guys that we play with maybe to stop feeling like there's some white knight or this whole like white knight stigma, and that they're not just trying to impress the girl playing?
Yeah, I was almost going to bring up the white knight thing, but I didn't know if that was an okay term.
You can bring it up.
So that is a problem. If men do speak up, they might be shut down by the sort of hostile player as white knighting and just trying to get the attention of the girl. But there's kind of this weird, complex thing going on where a lot of the trolling parties, a lot of the more negative players sort of look at women's involvement as just trying to get involved with guys who play games, and then guys that are sort of offended by things that are going on with hostility, they're just trying to get the attention of girls. And so as an expert in culture, I'm always going to say it's a cultural problem. And I think it's just something where we need to reach a tipping point. And it's unfortunate because it's not a really satisfying answer, but I think that we're moving toward that tipping point. And I'm seeing a lot more people sort of saying, why does it have to be a hostile environment? Why do we have to deal with this? I do a lot of work looking at people talking on Reddit, for example. And there's been a marked...
I'm sorry.
There's been a marked change in the way that people talk about these issues, which has been really interesting since about 2014, where a lot of people were like, no, we don't want women involved in games. They're just going to ruin the industry. To, well, no, I think it's actually good if we have more women involved because, that's not hurting anyone. It's just making games better. It's helping the industry. It's getting them more money. And so we're in the middle of a shift right now, and I think that we're moving to a point that those more hostile players are really a vocal minority. And part of the problem is a lot of players have been conditioned to just be quiet and not talk. And so you only have the hostile players doing the talking, but you have this growing majority of players who are just sick of the toxicity and sick of the hostility. And so I think if people are just more vocal about it, if we actually see that they're the majority, it will help us go over that tipping point.
No, is that something that you guide your players with? Like, you gotta support your fellow gamer and like good sportsmanship and...
Yeah, so absolutely. First, I'm going to divert a little bit. Sorry,
okay,
I
just
really want to answer the previous question about like diversity in the games itself. Just to note that, I don't think it's an accident that Overwatch as an esport and Overwatch as a game has a much more diverse fan base, given that like there's characters in the game that range from a canonically gay woman all the way to like an Afro-Brazilian man, right? Like it is not accidental that Overwatch represents, I think, one of the most diverse PC and console-based games out there. And that's been really incredible to see from my perspective as like, if I'm working in a game like Counter-Strike, it's great to be able to kind of create these community norms, but it can be difficult because there's already to some extent been not a full, but at least a partial like homogenization of the community, right? Whereas I think Overwatch really coming in fresh and really having a diverse set of characters you can play as has been incredible for creating a more diverse community right off the bat. To answer the actual question, I think, I think just kind of playing back on a few of my previous answers as well as a few of the other answers on the panel is like taking action, I think to me looks like going out of your way to build community so that you can set standards within your own community, right? I think it's always going to be really difficult for one person as an individual to make an outsized impact. Whereas I think as you either participate in a community or start a new community or really grow your social network inside of the gaming ecosystem, not just kind of reporting in an existing social network into the gaming ecosystem, one person can have more and more of an impact, and one voice can have more and more of an impact. And it's been really interesting for me to see, you know, again, bringing it back to Overwatch, looking at like the competitive Overwatch subreddit, r/competitive Overwatch. It's a subreddit that can be a little toxic. It can be very reactive. But it is also a subreddit that is shockingly progressive on a lot of social issues, right? Like, you would not expect that a subreddit that calls players trash to also be like, oh, but we all love Geggery and we want to protect her. And that's great, right? Like, I would love if it was all the way on the non-toxic side of things, but there's like incremental progress there. And so I think that happens as you begin to set norms as a community about what is and isn't acceptable, and when there are actual stakes to acting in an unacceptable way, kind of what I said earlier. And I think we all get to participate in that because we all choose the communities that we participate in. The communities that we're parts of, we all have a say in how they're governed and the norms and the standards there. And we all have the ability to either join new communities, start building new communities, or invite new people into our own communities. So it's great that y'all are here in person and kind of forming a new community here, but I'm also really hopeful that everyone will kind of go home and through their gaming experiences, not just view gaming as a kind of individual pursuit outside of your normal communities, but instead view it as a new avenue to build a new community through the games.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Nicole, let's take the name of our panel, next steps and action items, and tell us what you think the next step is for a healthy, inclusive space.
I feel like I'm back in the office. Next steps and action items.
I need that on an Excel spreadsheet,
I
please,
know.
and share
Let's
it with
get the
me in
tracker
Google
going.
Docs.
So I know a lot of the conversation has been largely about like community and player communities, and that's kind of not super my world. So I'll kind of keep it to the industry. And I know on our side, pressing for progress and doing more than, as much as the panels and the conversations are great, we need to go beyond that. That's something that we're super invested in and really working on hard. I think for us, there's a few things. So trying to actually create the ally culture. So what does it mean? What does it look like? Defining it, I think, is really important. I think there's a lot of talk that goes around diversity and inclusion and building teams, but like, what does that mean? Like, where are the actual hard numbers? Is it 50% of people on your team are women? You know, is it, you know, increased people of color, increased, you know, kind of people from different areas? I see a card that says end. So I'll wrap it up. But essentially, it's actually put some actions against it and define what success means.
Alice, what do you got?
I was just going to say, looking around at the room, I think the action items are, if this is your passion and if you're interested, get into it and go big. You know, if this is where you want to be, you belong, and it's up to you to get in here and make it a more welcoming environment for others. And I think we're moving in the right direction, and the timing's never been better.
All right, Noah.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit, I mean, it's not fair that it is this way, right? But like, I'm going to put a good amount of the responsibility on the shoulders of people in the room, both up here, but also out there, right? Like, if this is what our gaming community looked like, we would have a much different gaming community. And so basically anyone in this room, no matter what piece of the room they're in, like, if you want a community that looks more like this than what traditional gaming has looked like, and if you want a community that's more friendly to the type of people that are in this room versus what it's been like in the past, it's on all of us to take action to create that. And I think we've brainstormed some pretty good ways to do that on this panel. I also think that there are lots of ways that I'm definitely not thinking of, or lots of things that we haven't had the opportunity or the time to talk about now. So, yeah, I guess my action item is take action, which sounds like a good action item.
I'm actually gonna, I think, Alice, I agree with what you said about us being on the right track for things. I think that things are really starting to change, and this is evidence of that. I don't think that this would have been an event or even thought of as an event, 15 years ago. And so I think in all parts, the industry is taking more steps, players are taking more steps, we're starting to see cultural shifts in forum discussions. I think that we're in a decent place. But obviously we do need more change. And so I'm gonna say the visibility thing again. If you're out there, if you're playing games, make it known. Don't be afraid to talk about video games. And if someone's a jerk, you met a jerk. And it's sort of just, brush it off, move on, talk to the next person, and hopefully the next one is a better experience. There's always going to be a jerk no matter what space you're in, and we kind of just have to take them with a grain of salt and know that they're not the majority anymore.
All right, Morgan.
Just really quickly, and I think this applies to everybody here because we're already doing this, but I think in-person events like this, or streaming parties, or playing together, bringing back the old school LAN party feel, actually is kind of, I think, a key to moving into a future that's a little bit more inclusive. Because we used to have that back in the day when we did LAN parties, because when you meet people in person, they're much more likely to be friends with you and to be supportive and know that you're cool and you know that they're cool, and then you go online and play together and they're cool. Like it's way easier to overcome that sort of social barrier. And I think we have the technology now to be bringing together a lot of these audiences and now make it regional again. We kind of were started off regional in LANs, and then we could play, with all the crazy, awesome, cool server networks around the world, and everybody started to do it only online because they could. But then we were isolated. So now we need to merge those things, the regional doing stuff in person with the awesome power of the internet. We can have a better future.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we've come to the end of our panel. A huge, huge round of applause for our panelists.